Welcome to the Lawsalooza podcast, a legal comedy podcast where we discuss some of the most ridiculous laws and funny cases from around the world while sipping on some adult beverages related to that week's theme. My name is Shawna Vasilko.
I'm Miranda Dews.
And I'm Lindsey Reedy.
And we are three North Carolina attorneys bringing you a unique twist on legal cases. But nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal advice. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Lawsalooza Podcast. Have a law or case suggestion, or just want to send us a note? You can email us at lawsaloozapodcast@gmail.com. Now for our first episode.
This week, for the law, we're going to be talking about laws pertaining to what you can do with a bullfrog after it has competed in a frog jumping competition.
And moving on with the animal theme, we'll hear a case about the time when France tried to excommunicate a bunch of rats.
But first, let's start with our adult beverage. The cocktail I have for you guys this week is called Mousetrap. I found the recipe on cocktailbuilder.com.
It's very fitting for your case.
It is.
The recipe will be linked in our show notes, but first, this cocktail contains vodka, triple sec, orange juice, lemon lime soda, and grenadine.
Oh, no.
So I have in here mixed the vodka, the orange juice, and the triple sec.
Oh, wow.
Add some ice. Never been a bartender, but we're going to give it a little shake, shake, shake.
Okay, girl.
It already smells strong.
I did bring the cheese balls for a reason.
Yep.
We'll strain it out here. We'll give Miranda the most.
Oh, great.
You have the case today, so
Thanks.
it's fitting. And it's the mousetrap.
Right, we got to catch those rats.
That is wild.
Alright, so.
And then we add in...
Oh.
I was ready to go.
We add in our lemon lime soda.
Okay.
And then we will top it with the grenadine in just a moment.
Why is it called the mousetrap?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I didn't know if it had like something to do with how the drink was layered or what.
They didn't have any description on why it was called
You know what?
Mousetrap.
That's fine.
I just thought it sounded good.
It's fine. It fits. Works.
So a little splash of the grenadine is what it calls for.
Okay.
All right, now take a sip and let's see what you guys think.
All right.
Okay.
Should we cheers?
Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers.
To our first episode. Oh my gosh, it's so strong.
It's very strong.
Very strong.
It's extremely strong.
Fantastic taste. I am not a connoisseur, but it tastes good. Can't describe what I'm tasting, but
I think it's the orange. You really taste
The orange,
Oh,
you really
yeah.
do, which is great because we're filming this in the morning. So orange juice is breakfast.
Yeah,
does this count?
works for me.
If they can count mimosas, they can count this.
Yeah, it's got orange juice in it.
Sounds good. Now let's move along to this week's law.
So this is a fun one. When I was doing the research for this law, all you had to type in was crazy animal laws, and there was a ton of stuff that popped up. But this one was particularly interesting. So in California, there is this huge fair that they hold, and they do a massive frog jumping competition. Like in I think it was not even 2019, I think it was more in the early 2000s, there was over 4,000 frogs that was entered into this competition. It's wild.
Wow.
So,
Like
I guess...
little frogs or like, are we talking
bullfrogs,
massive?
like massive
Oh,
bullfrogs.
gross.
And I will say, so I kind of got drug into it when I started watching it, because I had never heard of frog jumping competition. And so I started to look into it, and I started watching YouTube videos. There's a science behind picking your frogs. There's a debate on whether it's their body temperature that makes them jump further, or if it's their weight, how much they've eaten, things of that nature. So there's a whole science to it. But with that being said, I believe, and I'm not sure if this was in particular to this county fair. It's called the Calaveras County Fair and Jumping Frog Jubilee. It goes multiple days. I mean, it's a whole event. And
Plus, it would have to for 4,000
yeah,
frogs.
I mean, like, really, they just line them up and keep them rolling. And the way it works is they have this, like, center spot where they drop the frog, and someone chases them across this, like, stretch, and they call them jockeys, frog jockeys.
Of course they do.
I'm like, okay, very interesting. But
Are these like little people, like kids, or
kids?
kids? Like,
Yeah, not
grown
kids, but
adults.
kids. Speaking of, in 2019, or maybe it was 2021, I can't get my dates correct. I don't know them. Can't keep them straight in my head. But in the last few years, a 7-year-old actually won. She was the frog jockey, and the world record is over 21 feet.
What?
And you win $5,000 if you get your frog to jump more than that.
The frog jumped 21 feet in one jump.
No, so they...
What the heck? That's terrifying.
No, we're not talking like monster frogs here that are like leaps and bounds across everything. But like they drop them on this one...
Okay.
Yeah, total.
Okay.
They drop them on this one circle, and they have 3 jumps. And they measure from, it's either the circle or the middle of the stretch to the last jump. And so, world record is 21 feet. If you can beat the world record, you get $5,000. And this girl, her frog went 20 feet, so she barely missed it. But, yeah, so it's interesting. But there is a law pertaining to this that, and I want to read this out loud to make sure I do not mess this up. Any person may possess any number of live frogs to use in frog jumping competitions. But if such a frog dies or is killed, it must be destroyed as soon as possible, may not be eaten, or otherwise used for any purpose. And so when I was sitting there thinking about eating, they have fried frog legs, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I've had them before. I think they taste like chicken. Didn't bother me. But
We're not
okay.
doing a tasting with this.
No.
Unfortunately, I did not bring something for us to taste. It's a great idea for later episodes.
Yeah,
But, so I was like, okay, the eating, like, I don't really know why we're not eating them. Like, I don't understand why they're not to be eaten.
Might have died of a disease.
Well, maybe.
During a contest?
Like,
I don't know, maybe.
I don't know either, but the part that really got me was for other purposes. So I was like, okay, well, maybe they mean that you can't taxidermy them.
Yeah.
Because have you guys seen?
Yeah, I never thought of that.
So, for example,
I was thinking they wanted to give them a proper burial.
A proper burial?
See where you know these competition frogs.
No, which is
Frog
funny,
cemetery.
right? Because when I read the jockey part, I started thinking about the thoroughbreds in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
I was like, do they live this super lavish life as frogs that are going into frog jumping competitions? And so I could not find anything about special treatment of the frogs, but that's what I imagine in my head, is that they're treated like the thoroughbreds for Kentucky Derby. But anyways, on the taxidermy side, because I recently, I'm not sure if you guys follow this creator on TikTok. I think her actual handle is Pot Roast's Mom. She had this cat that was dearly beloved by all of her followers. She's fantastic, very funny. And unfortunately, Pot Roast, which was the name of the cat,
Of course.
passed away a few months ago. And she actually had the cat taxidermied. And so, which I thought was weird at first too, but it's kind of cool. She showed the process. It was cool. But I was like, oh, is that what frogs do? And actually, I'll throw up a picture. But it's like the taxidermy of frogs, it's interesting. Like, you can pose them and all the fun things. So I didn't know if you like pose them in a jump, like in a jump pose. But anyways.
Back to Pot Roast. Does Pot Roast make appearances now that he is taxidermied?
No, so she has this, someone, I don't know if she ordered it or if someone gave it to her, but she's got like a robotic version of Pot Roast, and she now fosters kittens, and she just puts the robot Pot Roast in with videos of the new kittens. It's actually hilarious. If you haven't watched it, you should go watch your TikToks. They're super funny.
And follow us.
Yeah, and follow us too while you're at it. But No, so that was very interesting to me. Actually, so when I was thinking about the thoroughbred idea that they're treated like very royally, like the thoroughbreds for the Kentucky Derby, I had looked up names of famous Kentucky Derby winners, and so one of them was Lost in the Fog, and I was like, okay, we could actually name a frog Lost in the Frog. And like playoffs of like winners of the Kentucky Derby, and then I had one other one. Oh, Man of War, but do Man of Frog instead. I was like, this is a pretty interesting concept. So, I don't really know what falls under this used for any other purpose, but in my mind, that's what it is.
Is this just like a local law, or is it a statewide law?
Actually, I did not check on that. I would imagine it at least is local to that county.
Interesting. Well, at least the frogs are taken well care of after death.
Yeah, I mean, they have a law against it, so very interesting. But
Well, I don't know. They are. It says they must be destroyed as soon as possible.
which I think is like maybe cremated, like maybe cremate the frog, or
Maybe we're being very kind to the frogs.
that's what I'm gonna go with. So that was an interesting law that I came across, and I just could not believe it. I started to go way down the rabbit hole, watching videos, which I'll provide in the links below if you're curious, because I learned a lot. Like, for example, one of the videos that's linked, it's got a father-daughter duo who go and they don't hunt frogs, but they go look for frogs for them to use in the competition each year. And they've got this whole system. She's like a pro frog catcher. Like, she lays down on the front of the boat, has her little headlight on, and is like grabbing frogs as they're like driving or boating through the swamp. It is wild.
Do they put it back if they aren't up to their standards?
Yeah, well, and it goes back to this whole science of if they're too big, they're not going to jump very far, and so they sit there and analyze the frogs as they're catching them.
It's crazy.
It's an entire sport. It is wild. I tried to see if there was anything similar in North Carolina, and I could not find anything. The North Carolina Zoo, I don't know when they last had it, but they had a frog jumping competition where you do it at home.
What?
And like you just send in how far they jumped.
Like a video?
I think just measurements.
Is that because of quarantine?
Maybe so. Like,
home frog jumping.
can you imagine? Yeah. But then there's one annual one in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So I was like, oh, that might be a field trip.
Interesting.
We can enter a frog.
I'm like way too invested.
Lawsalooza podcast frog.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we can name one after the podcast. But I found
If
myself
it happens, we'll video it.
super invested. Yeah, if we end up doing that, we'll
We can
throw
get it like a
out
little jersey.
there. Yeah.
That might weigh it down, though.
Not if it's lightweight.
Yeah, I don't know. We're gonna have to look into the science of it, guys. I can walk us through the analysis, but and there's plenty of videos on YouTube apparently that kind of teach you the rules of the game. So very interesting stuff.
Very interesting.
It was tough. So when I was researching what law to do, you can come across all these websites that have like 100 crazy animal laws, what have you, but I actually wanted to find one where I could find the statute or the ordinance or what have you and actually verify it. And
that's the attorney in you.
Yeah. Well, I was like, okay, well, maybe it's not directly in there and they're just pulling this off of what's not in the law or what have you. But this is actually enacted. It was enacted back in, I think, 1997. So it's been here for a while.
I was going to say it's pretty recent, and then I realized it is 2022.
Yeah.
So
It is.
Man, I would have been 2 in 1997. Yeah, no. It's been a while, Miranda. I don't know where you're
say how old I would have been.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
So sorry.
We were also 2 then.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can roll with it.
All right, so this is the tale of the trial of the rats of Autun, which is a city or a town in France, and I think it's important to know that historians generally agree that this is actually a true story and that it actually happened this way, which is insane because the more you listen to the details of the story, the crazier it gets. like, you'll hear detail and you're like, surely it can't get worse. It does. It absolutely gets worse. And the greatest part is that historians do agree that it happened, although there seems to be some conflict about what year it happened in. Some sources say 1522, some say 1508. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that it did, in fact, happen. All right, so it's like the early 1500s in France, Burgundy, France. It's a pretty bad time to be a peasant. You know, because they're dealing with, like, plague every couple years, like, famine, they're poor, you know, stuff like that.
This sounds terrible.
It's pretty bad.
It's a terrible time.
And they're like, you know, things are pretty bad for us. We don't really like being peasants. And then all of a sudden things just get worse because these rats come in, and it's in Burgundy, this region of France that's known for its barley and wheat production. So they're not really good for growing much other than barley and wheat. Okay, so the peasants are like tending the barley and wheat, whatever, and they're like, you know, this hard work, whatever, kind of sucks, but at least we got like barley and wheat. Okay, until they don't, because these rats come in, and the rats are like, oh, barley and wheat, there's tons of it. Let's eat this, it's delicious. So these rats are here eating the barley and the wheat, and the peasants are starting to freak out a little bit because, like, they're poor, they have plague, their barley and wheat is being eaten.
Yeah, it's their food source.
Yeah, so they get a little...
their money.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're getting a little panicky. And so then the nobles in the area also get panicky because, like, the last thing they want is panicky peasants.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're like, revolt, all this stuff. Like, we like being rich. We like being in power. And we don't want the peasants to be freaking out. So, like, they're thinking, like, what can we do to help solve this problem, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so then they're like, we have an idea. This is a really good idea. We'll have a trial, and we'll put the rats on trial. And then that'll solve the problem.
Like in court.
In court, yeah. In court. So the nobles come together and they're like, we will actually institute a lawsuit against these rats, right? Like, against the rats, like all of the rats. And so...
Wait, hold on. TV time out. Can you imagine that happening today? Like, someone coming into the courthouse and...
Well, a cat did just get sued not long ago.
That's true.
What?
Yeah,
I read the U.S.
Yeah, I read this case. It actually popped up on, like, my Google News. You know how it, like, it recommends news to you based on your search history. And so I had this as my top recommendation, and it was, like, about this cat that got sued. And I think it was in Seattle, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, for, quote, taunting other animals in the neighborhood. And I was like, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Like, of course your cat is going to taunt other animals. It's like, it's a cat.
They taunt be a cat lawyer?
So, no. But it was great because I was like, thanks, Google. Like, this is exactly the content I want to see on my Google News feed. Like, Google gets me.
Spot on.
Yeah. So, and that was, maybe it came up because I was looking up this case.
Maybe.
Maybe. But also, side note, like, this is my favorite court case of all time, and you have no idea how hard it was to not talk about this once we decided that animals is going to be the theme. So, yeah. Anyway, so it's like 1500s France. Peasants are getting panicky. Nobles are getting panicky. They decide they're going to institute the suit in court against these rats. Okay, so the issue is at the time there's basically, there's basically two main courts in France. They've got the ecclesiastical court, which is, through the church, and they also have just a regular trial court, like a secular court. So the issue is, like, what court can we bring this in? Can we bring it in the secular court, or does it have to be through the church? And
or none of the above.
They have to bring the whole suit.
Yeah.
They have to. I mean, there's a harm that's been done, and someone needs to pay for that harm.
Oh my gosh.
So they decide that the proper venue to hold this trial is in the ecclesiastical court, which is only for religious conflict. So just, like, keep that in mind. So at the time, there was actually, like, quite a few suits instituted against animals that could be held in either court. So typically the secular trial court is for animals that are owned by a person, like, think cats, dogs, livestock, stuff like this, because the thought at the time was, okay, well, these animals need to be held accountable for their crimes in regular secular trial court because they're owned and under the control of a person, so they're, like, part of the family. And so they can pay for their crimes that way. So they would have murder trials where, like, pigs were, like, for example, there was, like, this herd of pigs that trampled a farmer, and he died, unfortunately.
So I guess you could kind of relate it to how people are sued if they let their dog run wild.
Little bit, yeah.
Okay,
so
that I can see.
so-
Trying to, your face was like,
Yeah, well, that, and I was like, okay, the actual animal, like, what? I understand it being
Right.
affiliated to this owner.
Right.
But I was like, God,
So, yeah, like
make
there
it
was...
make sense.
Yeah. The pigs in that case, they were put on trial for murder.
Yeah.
The whole herd was acquitted except for, I think, 4 pigs that were
The whole
held
herd was acquitted.
responsible. But I digress. So,
Okay, so sorry.
The issue in this specific case, obviously, is the rats. And so the rats, these aren't pets. They're not part of anyone's family. They're not under the care and control of some human owner. So the nobles decide, well, obviously this has to be in ecclesiastical court. This is clearly a religious conflict because who sent the rats?
The devil.
The devil, yeah. That's what they decided.
are you serious?
Yeah. And so
Okay, well-
this was actually a trial against the devil. You know,
Okay.
acting through his agent, these rats. So, like, they genuinely did think that the rats were possessed by the devil and they were sent to cause blight and famine and unrest and all of this stuff. Because clearly it's like rats just don't eat barley and wheat unless they're sent by the devil. Like, this makes sense.
Okay.
So you can kind of follow this logic. And so
Yeah.
they're like, well, the rats have to be held accountable. And so also at the time, too, it was customary, well, wild animals would be held accountable in ecclesiastical court because they were all sent by the devil. You know, whereas like a family pet was sent, I guess, out by the family to do a crime and not by Satan. So, anyways,
Wow.
so they bring the case in the ecclesiastical court, and it's in the village of Atun, which is where the court was held. And so it's held at, which is also like kind of an unrelated funny side note, it was held at the Cathedral of St. Lazarus in Atun. And it's not the St. Lazarus you're thinking about, not the Lazarus that Jesus raised from the dead. When they built the cathedral, they thought they were building it for him, and then they purchased these relics that they thought were relics of like the Lazarus, you know, New Testament Lazarus raised from the dead by Jesus. But the relics they actually get are from a different St. Lazarus that came way later, who is way lesser known. So just kind of funny that this is like the off-brand St. Lazarus.
Oh my God.
So it's not the one that they thought they were. So just like everything about this is just kind of going south for these nobles. So also in ecclesiastical court, the only types of punishment that they can impose upon a guilty defendant is, there's only 2 types of punishment. First is excommunication, and second is, if I can pronounce it right, anathematization. Okay, so obviously excommunication, we all know what that is. You can't take communion at the church. You're like kind of cast out from the church. Okay, which is bad, and it's bad at the time. The rats can't take communion. Like, what can they do? And so the second one, though, is much, much worse. It's anathematization. So to do that, it means that you're binding this soul for eternal destruction. Like, you are condemning them to hell. So they're not just cast out from communion, they're cast out from all Christian society forever.
That's
hard.
That's incredibly aggressive.
It's very aggressive. And so because of
Is that
that,
still a thing today?
I don't know. I didn't actually look that up, but I don't
Well,
know
I
that
will
they
have
have
to later.
ecclesiastical courts today. I'm not sure. So anyway, so these are the 2 punishments these rats are facing. So they're kind of in a pickle, right? Like, they're just eating this wheat, doing their thing, and they might be excommunicated. They might also be, you know, condemned for all eternity. All right, so they have their little court date, the first day in court, and there's the judge up there in the...
Did they have representation?
Well, we're getting to that.
Oh my
so
God.
this is where it gets
my
good. So this is where it gets really juicy. So they're in there on their first court date, and do the rats show up? No, they in fact do not. And so there's this jurist, this French jurist at the time. His name is Chassaneau, which it took me a long time to figure out how to say that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it is, Chassaneau. He's an esteemed French jurist, so he's a bit of a prodigy, I suppose, at the time. He entered his study of law at age 15. He worked as an officer in the government. He also studied in Italy, and apparently was was run out of Italy by plague, so he's like, got to get out of here, going back to France. So he's familiar with Roman law and French legal history, which is important because at the time, French law is kind of a mess. So the northern part of France is following like a customary legal tradition. It's not a written code. They're just kind of, you know, what did we always do? That's what we're going to keep doing. The southern part is more like Roman law mixed with custom. So they do have codes, canon, and commentaries that they're kind of following, but a little bit of custom too. And Autun is like right in the middle. So,
of course it is.
Yeah, of course. So it's important that Chassaneau, he knows French law, he knows the Roman legal tradition, he knows it all, and he appears in court. He's in court, and he's like, we cannot try these rats without giving them representation.
Wow, how noble of him.
Because
chivalrous.
Any defendant is entitled to legal representation, right? Especially when they're facing such serious consequences.
Like damnation.
Like eternal damnation, exactly. Or, you know, being cast off from the church, not being able to take in communion anymore. So
those poor rats.
That's what he was saying. That was his whole argument. He's like, you guys, like, this is just straight up unfair. Like, we are a civilized people. Like, these rats must be appointed an attorney. And so I guess that either he volunteered or the judge was like, sounds like you're volunteering. Why don't you just do it? We're going to assign this to you. Like, can you imagine being on, like, that court contract and they're like, we're going to assign these rats to you. Like, you're like, crap.
Tag, you're it.
And so, anyways, he gets appointed to be the representative of the rats. And so, they have to issue a summons to get the rats into court, right? Like, that's another important part of their legal system, important today. You know, you can't face any kind of consequences of your alleged crime if you weren't properly summoned. Or to come into court. You weren't served with the paperwork, right? And
you have to know that there's court against you.
Exactly. And so you can't necessarily be sentenced in your absence if a summons wasn't properly issued. Well, that's the same way back then. And so Chassaneau, he's the very zealous advocate of these rats, and he's like, you guys, we have to follow the law. We have to follow the law. I don't care if you think these rats are, like, possessed by Satan, they're eating the barley, blah, blah, blah. Like, we have to follow the law. And so we must issue a summons.
To their last known address.
Wow. We're getting to that.
Oh my gosh.
So, there's... In France at the time, in ecclesiastical court, there's no jurisdiction to hold the accused until the court date. So this is not secular court where they can just, like, arrest you and hold you and then bring you into court on your court date, like what courts can do today. So this is, I guess, maybe a little more like civil court, you know, where you issue a summons and then just hope that the person gets it and come into court. So it's kind of like that. So anyways, this summons is issued, and Chassaneau's like, first of all, there's a lot of issues with your summons. So what they had been doing is just at the pulpit, you know, the priests are like, okay, also at the end of their sermon, I guess, they're like, okay, rats, we're having a trial, it's on this day, here's where it's going to be. So any rats in attendance today, just make sure you show up, please. Well, these rats are possessed by Satan, so they're probably not going to church. Like, they're just, and so Chassaneau is like, also, there's a ton of rats. And it's not logical to think every single rat that was eating the barley and the wheat was in church to even hear the priest say that. And they have no obligation to share that news with their fellow rats when they leave the church and go out, right? So,
are these actual arguments he's making?
Yes. Allegedly, apparently, historians seem to agree.
Wow,
yes.
He really does fit the bill for a zealous advocate.
Like, honestly, the most zealous advocate. Like, I would love to go back in time and just watch this and be like, wow. What a genius. A legal genius. So he's coming up with these arguments. There's all these problems with their summons, right? Like, you can't just announce it and expect that all the rats will hear, because we're probably talking about hundreds and hundreds of rats. It's like the whole region of Burgundy is being affected by these rats. And so it's not just like the one or two that wander in church on Sunday.
Right.
Or whatever day they're having church in the 1500s that are listening to it. And so they issue this huge summons, like summonsing the rats kind of initiative, right? And so they're announcing it in church, yes, but they also are creating these little posters And with, like, you know, rats, please come to trial. Here's your court date. Here's the location. It's at the off-brand Cathedral of St. Lazarus. Or the Cathedral of the off-brand St. Lazarus. So they're issuing these summons, and they're posting them on posts all around Burgundy and Autun.
And they're low enough the rats.
They are. Yeah, actually, yes. Chassanou, the zealous advocate, makes sure that they're low enough, you know, like on the post that the rats can see them. Because rats are pretty small. Like, they can't look up and, you know, see a post up there.
How do you know they can read?
Well, they have pictures.
Oh.
Yeah. They have pictures, like picture of a rat and like a picture of the cathedral, so they know where to go. And I guess, I don't know how they would draw the date. I guess maybe rats can read numbers or something.
What?
Rats at the time were more enlightened than rats now. Anyway, so they just make sure it's posted up everywhere, right? So they post these little summonses, little drawings of rats.
Service by publication.
Exactly.
Today.
Exactly. Because his first argument was we need to summons each rat individually. And the judge or whoever was just like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. There's like hundreds of rats and we can't like send out our one police officer to go summons all these rats because there's probably like, you know, other crimes being committed that they need to take care of. And if they're, you know, it'd just be like just totally lawless. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, what a waste of resources. So they put up these...
that's ridiculous. That's the part that's ridiculous.
And a waste of resources.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay. So they post up these little flyers, little rat picture, a little cathedral picture, a little date on there, time, whatever. Okay, so they show up to court on the next court date, and like all the nobles are there, the peasants are up in arms, they're there, the judge is there, you know, whoever is doing this. I think it was maybe like a bishop or something. Anyways, and Chassanou, he's there. And would you believe it? Not a single rat shows up. Not one.
Oh, wow.
Not one. And they're like, typical. Like,
how disrespectful.
Exactly. Like, they took the time to painstakingly post these summons around, and not a single rat shows up.
And at that time, they probably had to hand do each one.
Oh, yeah.
They probably did. When was the printing press invented? Was it in the 1400s? Honestly, a bad use of the printing press. Like, they were supposed to be printing Bibles and stuff, and, like, they don't need to be printing up.
Bibles.
They were. They couldn't print
Rat
Bibles.
summons.
Like, rat summons were, like, really low on there. So, anyways, the rats don't show up. I mean, there may have been a stray rat or two, but, like, not one that actually came when the judge was like, it's time for the trial of the rats. Where's the rats? And not a single rat came up there. And so this is a huge issue, and people are really mad, and they're like, you know what, let's just have a trial in their absence. Like, we have all the evidence that we need, and the rats didn't show up. That sounds like their problem.
They had service by publication, so
They
they
did.
knew to be there.
Okay, well, the legal genius Chassanou has another trick up his sleeve.
Of course he does.
Of course he does. So, and this is where it gets really good. This is where it gets so
Wait,
good.
this is where it gets really good? As if it hasn't been the entire time?
It wasn't so good yet. So this is his argument. He's like, excuse me, Your Honor, we cannot have a trial in the absence of these rats. And everybody's like, why not? Like, this is ridiculous. We just need to get this over with. Okay, so here's his argument. He says, a defendant who is properly summoned does not need to come into court if the journey into court is so dangerous that they would be risking their life to get there.
Oh.
Right? And so, silence falls across the courtroom. Dead silence. And everybody's thinking, he makes a good point. He does. Because what is out in the wild blocking these rats from coming into court? Cats, dogs, other wild animals. And so Chassanou
And
says...
the peasants.
Chassanou says to the peasants, are you willing to hold your cats and your dogs so that these rats can make safe passage to court on the next court date? And they say, no, that's ridiculous. Like, they're cats and dogs. Like, you know, cats are just going to do whatever they want to do, right?
Right.
And so he says to the court, well, will you ensure safe passage? Like, put a chaperone, I guess, like an officer to take the rats to court. And the court says, that's ridiculous. No, like, we can't do that. And so Chassanou says, then you must acquit. You must drop this court case because the rats want to come to court, possibly, but they like literally can't come because they can't be asked to risk their life to come into court. And so the court is like, this makes perfect sense. This is an excellent legal argument. It's great. It's foolproof. It's flawless. And so what happens? The entire court case is dropped and the rats go free.
And they eat the wheat and barley?
I assume they continue to eat the wheat and barley, yes, because they were still, in fact, supposedly agents of Satan. But the rats don't get excommunicated, and they don't get anathematized. So
That is wild.
they are not condemned to damnation. They can still partake in communion, all of this stuff.
I should let the church know that they are remiss for not allowing the rats to partake in communion every Sunday.
Chassaneau goes up later to write a series of books on law in France. The very first, so he writes a whole series of books, and his very, very first book is called Concilium Primumi. I don't know how to say that. That's fine. Primumi. And it's about how to try animals based on law and procedure. So the book is actually about how to properly excommunicate wild animals, because clearly, he was able to work around that. So, in the future, he kind of writes a how-to guide of like, guys, this is what you should do based on how he handled this case. And he actually goes on to represent other wild animals in court, very famously like weevils, pigs, etc.
Weevils.
Yeah, he does. They were also agents of Satan, Shawna.
Excuse me.
It's not funny.
Get with
Are
it.
pigs as well agents of Satan?
No, because they were domestic animals. They could be tried in secular court.
Right, right.
But he does go on to write a bunch of books, and the first one was about how to try animals.
Yeah, he knew the loopholes.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
That is wild. The attorney representing the cat should look into that.
He should definitely
That
get those
current
books.
case.
Well, I think that case is over, and I think the cat was actually held responsible for bullying the other animals, and I think he was also it was also trespassing that cat was
Of course.
charged with.
Of course. Cats are big trespassers.
Man,
Why didn't the peasants just send their cats out after the rats?
Rats can be big,
Because the
Shawna.
rats weren't condemned yet in court.
And-
Wow. Okay.
And rats can actually hurt cats. They can
Really?
be big. Have you seen how big rats can get?
I'm not a fan.
Oh, yeah, no. Some people keep them as pets. More power to you, but no thank you. No thank you.
Yeah.
No.
So, yeah, Shawna, I mean, they hadn't been convicted in court. You can't just exact your own justice, vengeance. These, like, vigilante cats out there eating these. You are innocent until presumed guilty.
I just said run them out.
Well,
You'll
eventually.
come back.
Patrol.
Put a little cat patrol.
Also, it's possible there weren't, like, a whole ton of cats at the time.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure. This is something that it's said to be myth, but also may be true, and I just like to think it's true. But apparently, I believe it was Pope Gregory the IX. He declared that all cats within, like, I guess the Holy Roman Empire were agents of Satan and, like, ran them all out. And
Cats?
so, yeah. Anyways, all the cats were, like, run out because he was like, these things are weird. I don't like them, so let's just get them out. Anyway, so it's possible there weren't, like, a whole ton of cats then.
Okay.
I mean, I think that was, like, 100 years before this, but regardless, I mean, you can't just exact vigilante justice, Shawna.
Obviously.
So,
You have to have a good attorney. That's what I learned from this story.
Yeah.
right. So,
Everyone needs a good attorney.
everyone, including the rats, they all need a good attorney.
Yes.
So,
Very interesting story.
Chassaneau, the great
Chassaneau.
pioneer of animal law, I
I
guess.
feel like we need to have like a shrine to Chassaneau.
Although later
in
he
the
does write a
podcast
book
room.
about how to convict animals, so, maybe he had some conflict of interest here, but he did get them. He did get them all off. Every single rat. Every single one. So,
That's
Way to go,
impressive.
Chassaneau.
yep. Here's to Chassaneau.
To
Chassaneau.
Well, guys, I guess that's our first episode.
Yep. Thanks for listening. Remember to like and subscribe.
See you next time.
Bye.